Welcome into the Fantasy Pros Football Podcast. My name is Kyle Yates, and I am your host. I am joined, as always, by Mike Tagliere, and we can find us on Twitter at KyleYNFL and at Mike Tagliere NFL. Tags, what is up, man?
Oh, nothing much. I just thought I'd let you know I am wearing a backwards hat today. So I figured you'd be proud of me because you were razzing me the other day about not wearing a backwards hat, and so I had to go through my closet and find one that wasn't like a snapback or anything like that. It has to be a fitted hat and it has to fit right, and so I have one on today.
Well, I have a forward-facing hat, so it's Freaky Friday, and we've switched. But hey, it's not just Tags and I today. We are joined by Matthew Freedman. He's the editor-in-chief at Fantasy Labs, host of the Action Network podcast, and he can be found on Twitter at Matt F. the Oracle. Matt, thanks for joining us today, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me. A few things off the top. One, I'm wearing no hat today, so we really pulled the trifecta there.
There we go.
Two, apologies in advance to everyone who is listening to my voice right now and thinks that it's Mike Tagliere talking. It's actually not. It's his vocal doppelganger. Tags and I have been told that we have basically the same voice. So I just want to say up front, if at any point in this episode you are hearing bad fantasy analysis and it is coming to you in a very monotone voice, just assume that it is Mike and not me. And then the third thing is, I don't want to really make too big of a deal of this, but guys, it's been a while since I've been on the show. I'm feeling a little neglected here, and I have a theory. My theory is that Mike has had beard dominance on the show for so long that he's never wanted a guest to come on and have a beard that might match his. So, Mike, thanks for having me on the show and giving me a chance to outbeard you.
Well, that's why we're keeping you off video. So Yates and I are doing video for the YouTube channel if you guys haven't seen that. But Matt was not invited to put his fantastic beard because it is getting quite long, man. We did a podcast just last week together, and Matt has a beautiful beard.
Yeah, so now I really do know why I'm not on the video, and I feel really insulted, but let's move on.
Absolutely, guys. All right, before we move into the content of today's show, I want to remind you all about this insane giveaway we've got going on. A signed Davante Adams helmet. Does that sound good? Oh, wait, there's more. A $200 gift card for Pristine Auction. A $200 gift card to Porter Road Butcher. A package of fantasy football goods for your league's champion and last place loser from Trophy Smack. And a 1-month subscription to Fubo TV. We'll be giving this grand prize package away once we hit 7,000 reviews on Apple Podcasts. We have 6,500 right now. In addition, we are going to give a bonus to the winner if they are a subscriber to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/fantasypros. And the bonus prize will be a Zoom call with our fantasy analysts. To enter the giveaway, just leave an honest review for our show on Apple Podcasts. Take a screenshot of that review, and also take a screenshot showing that you subscribe to our YouTube channel to qualify for the bonus prize, and send those to contest@fantasypros.com. For more details on this contest, just head to fantasypros.com/contest. Again, that's fantasypros.com/contest. All right, guys, today we are going to be talking busts. These guys that could end up disappointing this season relative to where you draft them. The players we're going to list here today aren't necessarily ones that we're saying avoid at all costs, right? Like these aren't not these players. This is simply an exercise to point out the players that we believe are going to disappoint relative to their ADP. And if you're just joining us for the first time, welcome. This ADP stands for average draft position. And so relative to their ADP and how much you have to pay to acquire them, we're looking at the top 24 running backs and wide receivers, and we're each going to choose a couple names from this list, and then we'll look at either one quarterback or tight end that's being drafted within the top 12 at those positions. Sound good?
Sounds fantastic.
All right, well, Tags, let's shift it over to you right away here, man. Let's go with the top 24 running backs. We'll go around each, around the room once, excuse me. So let's go with you first. Who's your first running back here?
Yeah, I know there's a lot of people tuning into this show that maybe have tuned out, throughout the offseason. Some people get back into fantasy football mode in August, and I haven't really talked about this quite much, but Josh Jacobs is someone that, compared to his, where he's being drafted as high as the 7th running back off the board at the tail end of the first round, it's just too rich for my blood. I mean, I understand that he's a really good running back. He is, and I loved him out of college, and one of the best attributes he has is catching the ball out of the backfield. However, When you walk out of your rookie season with fewer than 30 targets in 13 games, that's a real problem for me. And I know he was dealing with a shoulder injury, but let's not pretend that they didn't bring in a lot of talent this offseason in terms of the draft. They drafted 3 pass catchers in the first 3 rounds, including Henry Ruggs at the number 12 overall, who's going to play in the slot, some of those intermediate targets that he's going to get over the middle of the field. So we could hear Mike Mayock, the GM, talk about, oh, we're going to get Josh Jacobs more involved in the pass game all we want. Where are those targets going to come away from? Where are you going to take them away from? Are you going to take them away from Darren Waller, who was fantastic last year? Are you going to take away from Jalen Richard, a guy that you re-signed to your team when you didn't really need to? It's just trying to figure out where these targets come from. So Josh Jacobs, to me, plays for an offense that's not going to be a top scoring team. So I don't think there's going to be there's not 15 touchdown upside with Josh Jacobs. I don't believe that he's heavily utilized in the passing game. He might get up to that maybe Joe Mixon territory from last year, maybe that 45 target range. And I think that's probably close to the ceiling in terms of what he can get with all the players healthy on this squad. So drafting him as high as you are, I just feel like you should be getting a player that's guaranteed to finish as a first round talent if he's on the field. And I just can't say that about Josh Jacobs.
Matt, I have him on my list. So he was one of my players, Josh Jacobs, and it's really looking at the offense and saying that Las Vegas, let's not pretend that Las Vegas is a very pass-happy team, right? Like they're not. You think of these pass-happy teams and just they're committed to the run game. So Josh Jacobs is going to be great with the work that he gets on the ground, but do you agree with Tags here that this is a potential bust and it's predicated upon the fact that he's not going to be as involved in the passing game as he'd like?
Yeah, exactly. He's someone I'm staying away from. He's not on my short list, but he's definitely on the bigger list. And I think you guys hit it right. There's the situation where if a guy's not getting touchdowns and he's not getting receptions, it's great that he's getting a lot of carries, but that just might end up being a lot of empty yardage, which isn't nothing. It gives him a decent floor, but it doesn't mean that he's going to have a great shot to be a top 6, top 8 type of league winning back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, looking at the offense, really, like he has obviously the workload. He's going to get, 270 carries in this offense, right? Like you're looking at the backs behind him and you're saying that no one's going to be taking work away from Josh Jacobs on the ground. But when you factor in Jalen Richard, like you said, Tags, but then also Lynn Bowden Jr., who's going to be this hybrid. They're talking about getting him snaps at quarterback, which I just don't see that. But he's an electric playmaker. He's electric with the ball in his hands. You're going to get him scheme touches. And he's an excellent receiver. So it's all going to go and be put into this pot where we're saying, can Josh Jacobs be this top-tier running back? Because he's currently going as the RB9 off the board. He's back in RB1. And for those players, you need them to finish there to build a solid foundation for your team. Tags, are you comfortable? I mean, obviously, it doesn't sound like you are, but are you comfortable with him as your RB1?
Not really. I mean, if I were to get him at in the middle of the second round, late second round, I'd feel okay about it, but you're not going to get him there. You have to take him either at the end of the first round or very top of the second round. That's where he's going, and there's just much safer players there. I would rather go with someone like Julio Jones, personally. And by the way, I just want to say to people listening, I have gotten emails on it before, and I sometimes forget to mention it, that we always reference half PPR formats because we basically, with the amount of shows that we're able to do, we can't do one standard, one half PPR, and one full PPR. So we try and do a middle ground because it applies to kind of both sides of the spectrum. And we will mention if there's someone that benefits greatly from PPR, we'll mention that. But we try and do somewhere in the middle. So Jacobs having that late first round ADP, I just think there's a lot safer options. Again, if you don't like running backs in that range and you feel like you need a running back, I would rather just take someone like Julio Jones, because Jacobs is in a tier with running backs that I feel like I don't think you're sacrificing much going down, a couple running back spots later than Jacobs. So again, I just feel like where he's being drafted is just way too high. You're drafting him basically at his ceiling, anticipating he's getting a lot more passing down usage.
For sure. All right, Matt, let's pivot to you here. Who do you have as this player for running back that you believe is going to disappoint relative to their ADP?
So one guy who's going in the top 12 that I'm looking to stay away from is Aaron Jones. And it has really nothing to do with Aaron Jones as a talent. I think he's a pretty talented player who's always been pretty efficient on a per opportunity basis. But I think 2 things are really working against him this year. One is just the obvious touchdown regression that's coming. He's not going to score, 19 touchdowns he had last year? He's not going to come close to that number this year. And then the second thing is that the Packers did just spend a second round pick on A.J. Dillon. And, I've gone back and forth with people on Twitter about A.J. Dillon. Let's assume that he's not automatically the second coming of Derrick Henry, but it is fair to note that he definitely has a Henry-esque type of skill set, and he certainly has the athleticism and the body to warrant a comparison to Derrick Henry, and he has in Matt LaFleur a play caller who is familiar with Derrick Henry and would maybe like to have a little more of a Henry type of force within that offense. So not only could we see Aaron Jones lose touchdowns potentially to A.J. Dillon, but he could also lose a lot of carries to A.J. Dillon as well. So I would expect fewer yards and fewer touchdowns. And for a guy who's going, right now around number 10, number 11 in half PPR ADP, that's just something I kind of want to stay away from. It's not that I think he's going to be a huge bust, but I think that he has more downside risk than a number of other guys in this range.
Yeah, there are obviously a lot of question marks surrounding Aaron Jones, and particularly with A.J. Dillon. And I think if they had added A.J. Dillon in the 4th round, right? Let's just say that A.J. Dillon was drafted in the 4th round. Would we still be having these same kind of questions tags as far as, okay, what do they actually think of Aaron Jones? Is Aaron Jones safe going into this year? It's just A.J. Dillon, they added a 4th round depth piece running back, but they spent a 2nd round draft capital on him. So do you think that factors in as far as the question marks that are now surrounding Aaron Jones?
I mean, it has to be factored in. And if we didn't factor in A.J. Dillon at all, I think Aaron Jones would be going higher in drafts. I think he would be going over guys like Josh Jacobs and maybe guys like Nick Chubb, just because we saw what Aaron Jones did last year, like hyper efficient, and he didn't get all those touches. And I've been talking on the show about maybe comparing him to someone like Alvin Kamara in terms of these guys continually. And if you look at, I did an article that basically looked at what players should have scored in 2019 and what they did in terms of the difference, like what they added over the average fantasy football player would have. Aaron Jones has finished number 4 as the number 4 running back in back-to-back years. So he's just hyper efficient. Alvin Kamara has been that running back as well. So I think we have to step back and say, okay, Aaron Jones doesn't need 22 touches per game to be an RB1 like a Leonard Fournette, like some of these guys. What he needs is as long as he's getting those 16 plus touches per game, I feel like he's going to give you that borderline RB1 production. Is he going to be a little bit touchdown reliant? Sure. But at the same time, Aaron Rodgers-led offenses always seem to be better for running backs. A lot of those guys just score touchdowns. Like Eddie Lacy fell into the end zone and finished as a top 5 running back on multiple occasions. We all know he wasn't very good at football. Aaron Jones just happened to be really good. The biggest problem here is Matt LaFleur. Matt LaFleur is just... He's oblivious to what he has on his team. The greatest talents on the Packers roster were Aaron Rodgers and Aaron Jones. And what does he do? He trades up to draft a quarterback in the 1st round, and then he drafts basically a fullback in the 2nd round. I worry about Matt LaFleur more than I do Aaron Jones. And obviously it could be like a John Kuhn effect where, and if Matt LaFleur, by the way, I just want to go back to that. If Matt LaFleur thinks A.J. Dillon is anything even close to comparable to Derrick Henry, it's comical. But it wouldn't surprise me, though. And by the way, going back to when Matt LaFleur had Derrick Henry, he didn't even know how to use him.
Right.
Obviously, we've seen Derrick Henry flourish when Matt LaFleur left. So Matt LaFleur is my biggest concern here. Aaron Jones at the end, he's basically at the tail end of the RB1s. So if you let's say if you take Michael Thomas at number 4 overall or something like that, and then you wanted to take Aaron Jones as your low-end RB1, I'm okay with it, but I do understand the concerns.
Matt, how far would Aaron Jones have to fall for you to consider taking him, right? Because you mentioned it, RB10, currently in ADP, ECR, which it stands for Expert Consensus Ranking, has him at RB13. How far would he have to fall for you to kind of say, okay, I'm comfortable with Aaron Jones now?
Like RB18? I know that's super low, so he's not going to fall there, and that just means I don't have any Aaron Jones. But I just think the downside risk is pretty significant, and there are so many other running backs within that general tier that I would rather have. Or I feel like I could just wait a little bit longer and get some guys who are cheaper, who have a likelihood of producing in the same range as Aaron Jones.
Yeah.
All right, guys, I'm going to bring up Derrick Henry here. And this is purely from the perspective that he's going as the RB5 in ADP right now. I think that's a little bit too high. Now, this is if there is a player that can be a steady contributor for your lineup week in and week out, Derrick Henry offers an extremely safe floor because you know that he's going to get 15, 17, potentially 20 carries a game. So this isn't me saying that Derrick Henry is going to finish outside the top 12 running backs, but it's purely looking at the cost to acquire him, and it's a very similar argument to what Tags had with Josh Jacobs, which is why I had Josh Jacobs on my list too. Derrick Henry is not a factor in the passing game. So when you are looking at a player that you have to rely on Derrick Henry getting a ton of work on the ground. What happens if Tennessee's efficiency drops back from last year, which they were incredibly efficient, and Derrick Henry had 303 carries on the season because this team was so efficient and was in games like leading, winning these games, and so he was getting these carries towards the end of the game. Well, 303 carries, and then how many touchdowns? 16, 15 touchdowns? I can't remember off the top of my head. So, so you are betting on him reaching those high benchmarks again this season to draft him at the RB5. I have him right now at RB9. So I'm looking at this and saying that there are other backs that I would prefer to have. And in this conversation, I would prefer to have these other backs over Derrick Henry. I'm going to say that Derrick Henry is going to disappoint relative to his ADP. Tags, I know that you took him in our PPR mock draft as your RB1 yesterday, so I'm sure that you're going to disagree with me here. What are your thoughts?
I'm disagreeing because it's weird, because if you were to go back a couple months ago, I probably would have told you I agree with you 100%, is that there's a lot of bust potential here. But then once I sat down and I went through some of the metrics I was able to this offseason, like not many people know that the Titans, I mentioned on our mock draft show yesterday, the running backs have averaged less than 1 yard before contact in each of the last 2 years. That's the only team in the league to do that. So their offensive line has been pretty brutal. I was worried about Jack Conklin leaving, but knowing that they were bad to begin with, I mean, I can't say that they're going to be any worse, because they've already been one of the worst in the league in terms of creating yards for their running back. Derrick Henry, their offense revolves around him. And, once they got to the playoffs, we did see that the team, everybody knew where the ball was going, and they still couldn't stop it, including Bill Belichick. That's a big deal, because Bill Belichick does know how to game plan. And then once I had gone through the article series that I did on boom bust and everything in between, seeing that Derrick Henry was just as consistent as any other running back that's taken in the top 5 in terms of consistency and RB1, RB2 performances, I was like, wow, maybe I did misinterpret the situation, because I felt like Derrick Henry was going to offer a lower floor than some of the other running backs being taken in the first round. But what he does, he offers a similar floor. He offers a ceiling. We know that he could break 90-yard runs at any point. So it's like, when you're trying to project players like me, projecting Kenyon Drake over a full 16-game season in a workhorse role, projecting Joe Mixon to get more work in the passing game, projecting Clyde Edwards-Helaire to be the player that I think he's going to be in the NFL, there's definitely question marks around those players, where Henry's just probably the safest one. I don't think there's any bust potential if he's on the field. I think that you might lose some of the potential overall number one upside, because I don't think Derrick Henry can finish as the RB1, considering how little he's used in the passing game, but he is safe as a middle tier RB1.
Sure. Okay, well, Tag, let's turn it right back to you. Who is your second running back here?
This one's really tough for me, because I could make arguments for everybody. I'm going to say that it's Mark Ingram. Just because we have a guy that's going on 31 years old. Obviously, season was ended early last year, just because dealing with injuries going into the playoffs. Lamar Jackson has touchdown regression towards the mean coming this year, which means he's going to score more touchdowns. Mark Ingram, there was just one game last year where he saw more than 15 carries. He was heavily reliant on these touchdowns, and now you have the Ravens who said, hey, we had to take J.K. Dobbins in the second. Why? Because we had a first-round grade on him. We felt like we were doing our team a disservice if we passed on him. And if they feel like J.K. Dobbins is truly a first-round talent, he's going to be on the field. Gus Edwards is a guy that they were giving carries to while Mark Ingram was playing pretty well last year. And again, you get up there in age. Mark Ingram had a ton of carries in college, ton of carries now on his body in the NFL. So him being drafted as a borderline top 20 running back, guys, we're not playing the 2019 season again. You have to look forward and understand that the Ravens are going to pass the ball more. Ingram's not involved in the passing game. Dobbins is the better 3-down back probably at this point in their career. Mark Ingram is someone that's definitely a bust candidate for me.
Matt, Mark Ingram last season, 5 receiving touchdowns on 26 receptions. That's ridiculous and unsustainable. Are you kind of in line with ECR and ADP here with Ingram, or are you much lower or higher? Where are you at on Ingram?
I think he's more of an RB3 than an RB2 here. And I agree with the perspective that Tags has on him. As a guy who's on the wrong side of 30, he just presents a lot of downside risk. And I think that's the exercise in trying to look at guys who have the potential to be bust. Just trying to avoid drafting guys needlessly who carry risk. There's a difference between drafting a guy who has risk but also has massive upside. I just don't see that here with Mark Ingram. And so if you do this exercise, you look at him, you see all the negative things around him. Even though he might offer some theoretical value based on his median projection, his downside projection could, it could ruin your season. So that's the type of thing that I'd want to stay away from.
Yeah, it makes sense. All right, Matt, let's turn it to you here. Who is your second running back here?
So I would be tempted to say Leonard Fournette or Todd Gurley, but I think they're strong candidates to bust. But I'll go with David Johnson here. Going as, I'd say, a late RB2, so maybe like number 24, so right on the cusp. And he's someone who I think could be tempting because you look at the opportunity that he could have in Houston and you look at historically what he's done and you think, okay, like he actually might get a real shot to lead this team. And if he does, he's going to pay off at his ADP, which like, I don't dispute that. Like the median projection for him is not that bad, but the downside risk is enormous. Like we're talking about a running back who has 3.6 yards per carry over the past 3 seasons, 6.7 yards per target over that same time frame. And this is a guy who's supposed to be one of the better receiving backs in the league. And he's 29 and he's already kind of like, he feels like a broken down back. Like David Johnson at 29 feels older than Mark Ingram at 31. Right. I just don't want to invest in players like that who seem as if they could break down at any moment.
So Matt, real quick, a follow-up to that. Are you into Duke Johnson then at his current ADP?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, let me try to rephrase that or contextualize it. I want to be interested in Johnson. And if there's ever a year in which Duke Johnson seems like he's positioned to break out, it has to be this year. But at the same time, you never know what B.O.B. in Houston is going to end up doing with his running backs. It seemed like last year would have been a good time when he had to overcome only Carlos Hyde. Yeah, right. But like that didn't happen. So, maybe David Johnson still ends up getting 200 carries. They're just highly inefficient. Or maybe David Johnson goes the wayside and they bring in some other washed up veteran, maybe like Devontae Freeman signs or something like that. So like I like the idea of Duke Johnson. And I think if he were actually given a shot, he could have some real, like peak LaShawn McCoy type of potential. I just don't know if he's ever going to get that shot.
Tags, for David Johnson to return value on an RB23 price tag right now, several things have to go his way, right? He has to be fully healthy, which what we saw last season would indicate that he is not, and he may be done. He has to be heavily involved in the passing game, which previously Houston Texans running backs have not been, historically. Now we can look back and say, okay, well, it was Lamar Miller, it's been Carlos Hyde, but traditionally they just have not been involved. Even Duke Johnson, as phenomenal as a pass catcher as he is, was not heavily involved in that role, and you still have Duke Johnson on the roster. So the path, and there's several other things, the path for David Johnson to return value is very, very minimal. Is he even worth considering? Or do you, in your draft, do you let someone else just take that, dice roll, and do you look at David Montgomery two spots later in the running back position?
Yeah, I think Montgomery's a safer pick because you're getting a floor with him. That's basically what people are saying is that, David Johnson, if he returns to the player he was, like his floor is low-end RB2. We could say the same thing about David Montgomery. It's just we know he's healthy, he's young, he's leaner. David Johnson, the reason that, I can't... It's tough for me to get too excited about David Johnson because this is a team that really does not fit his strengths. They haven't had a running back that typically garners a high yards per carry. They do have a lot of in between the tackle stuff, and that's why Carlos Hyde was able to rack up some numbers last year. But David Johnson's not that player. He's not a grinded out in between the tackles type of guy. He's a guy that you want to line up at wide receiver if you can, and they're talking about that. But Houston hasn't used their running backs in the passing game very much. Last year was the most, and Duke Johnson is the guy that they traded. Wasn't it a 3rd round pick for Duke Johnson?
Yeah, I think so.
That they traded. So, they clearly like Duke Johnson, and then they brought him in, and it's just like they have this role designed for him. So it's like you start wondering where David Johnson's strengths are going to be highlighted in this offense, and I just don't see it. So unless they get creative, which is really difficult to see under someone like B.O.B., I'm with you on this one. I don't think I'm going to own a whole lot of David Johnson. I think he's just like, he's basically, again, David Montgomery's a guy that I think I would draft over him just because we at least know that he's not on the last legs of his career.
Right. All right. Well, my second guy, was Josh Jacobs. So we're just going to move on and we'll pivot over to the wide receivers, guys. So, Tags, I'm going to send this to you. Who is a wide receiver that you believe is going to disappoint relative to their ADP within the top 24?
Mike Evans. Mike Evans being taken as the wide receiver 8 right now, I do not agree with. So here's a stat for you. Mike Evans, I'm not kidding, there were just 5 games last year where he scored more than 12 points in half PPR formats. 5 games. That's it. Okay. So he had games that carried him. His target totals in those games, 15, 12, 16, 17, and 7. So there was one game where he had less than 12 targets where he scored that. So essentially, this has been Mike Evans throughout his career. It's like you start going through it, you see like he's either scoring touchdowns or he's getting a lot of targets. He's being targeted down the field, so his yards per reception is way up there. It's over 17 the last 2 years. Jameis Winston is the guy willing to throw the ball down the field. Tom Brady, it's not to say that he can't throw the deep ball anymore, but he is not going to be chucking the ball down the field nearly as much as Jameis Winston. He also doesn't pepper wide receivers with targets who don't garner separation. It's why I didn't like N'Keal Harry in New England last year, and it's why that I really don't love Evans this year. I don't think that he's bad to have as like a wide receiver too, because again, he's a proven producer in the NFL. He is a touchdown scorer. They're going to find ways to get him the ball in the red zone, but I don't see Tom Brady targeting him over 10 times per game. And if he's not getting that, he's clearly shown that he's not a consistent wide receiver when he's not getting double-digit targets. Fun fact, Mike Evans was a wide receiver 2 or better last year in just 38% of his games. 38%. Like Christian Kirk was the same percentage. Sterling Shepard was actually higher. Like it was not a good season for him. Again, 41 points, 37 points, 30 points. Those performances carried his season totals to make him look like a better receiver than he actually was. Make no mistake about it. Chris Godwin is quickly going to become Tom Brady's favorite target in this offense, and Mike Evans is relegated to a wide receiver 2. So drafting him as the wide receiver 8, it's way too expensive.
Matt, we're looking at Tom Brady now at 43 years old versus Jameis Winston, who was more willing to stand in the pocket, let the pocket collapse on him, and hold on to the ball just an extra second longer to be able to take that shot, to allow Mike Evans to create a little bit of separation and to take that shot deep downfield. When we're looking at Tom Brady at 43 years old now, I was listening to a recent episode of a podcast. I can't even remember which one it was, but they were saying that at this point, he's going to get the ball out before he can get hit. Right? He's going to be this guy who is just going to take what is there. He's going to dissect a defense just quickly, and that's why I love Chris Godwin this year. Are you in agreement? Because Mike Evans was on my list too, as a bust at wide receiver 8 price tag. Are you on our side here, or where are you at with Mike Evans?
I don't know if I'd say that he's a bust, but I definitely imagine that he's not going to hit his ADP, in that he could fall under it by a pretty decent amount, but I still think of him as someone, it's weird. Like I think of him as someone who has, over the course of the season, a pretty high floor. If you look at what he's done in each of his 6 seasons in the NFL, he's basically been a lock for 1,000 yards receiving, but week to week, as Tags touched on, he's really inconsistent. So I think of him as more of a best ball play, just because you can sort of bank the points without having to think about the week to week consistency. But yeah, to Tag's point about just the reduction in volume, I think that's right. This is a team in Tampa Bay that led the league last year in pass attempts. Jameis Winston led the league in passing. I don't think we're going to see that out of Tom Brady. So I think fewer yards to go around for the wide receivers. I also think fewer touchdowns to go around for the entire team. And then also with Rob Gronkowski there, he could seize a significant share of the touchdowns. So I would expect Evans and Godwin to have fewer touchdowns this year than last year. And if you're combining that with fewer yards, yeah, there's significant downside with Evans.
I said it on a recent podcast. I said that I would love Mike Evans as my wide receiver too, because I think he does bring that upside. However, you're not getting him there, which is a big concern. Okay, Matt, let's turn it back to you. Who is your wide receiver in this range?
So Allen Robinson is a guy I have 0 of, and I'm totally fine with that. That's the way I want to live my life. Just 0 Allen Robinson at this point. And it's nothing against him as a talent. I really feel bad because I feel like his career has just been submarined by poor quarterback play, and then the ACL injury that he suffered in 2017, and Allen Robinson at his peak in 2015 with 1,400 yards and 14 touchdowns. Man, that guy just looked like a future superstar. But I don't think he's ever really going to develop into that guy. And last year we saw 154 targets, a career high, 98 receptions, a career high. And on that usage, he had, only 1,147 yards. It's not horrible, but, with that kind of volume, you would hope to have a guy who's getting more yardage. I'm just looking at that Chicago offense, and there's a lot of uncertainty at the quarterback position. There's a lot of uncertainty as to how efficient that offense is even going to be, I think, kind of regardless of who the quarterback is. I'm not expecting that many yards or that many touchdowns to go around for the entire offense in general. And then I would also expect for Allen Robinson that he's just going to get fewer targets. So I know he's going right now as a low-end wide receiver 1, and I get the enthusiasm around him. But man, I have him more as like low-end wide receiver 2. And even then, I'm thinking like there are just other guys I would rather have.
I know Yates is going to go after you on this one.
I have him at wide receiver 6. So I'm really all in on Allen Robinson this year, just because I'm looking at this offense, and yeah, you mentioned it, based on the receptions and the yardage, like there was very, very little yards after the catch in this Chicago Bears offense at all last year. Like none of the receivers were really able to get the ball in stride. And, you see that with Tariq Cohen's efficiency, his yards per reception dropping from 10 down to 5 something last year. So, like, Allen Robinson was getting the ball in a place where he wasn't able to turn up field. Same with Anthony Miller. And so I think that if Nick Foles, and this is who I am projecting to take over, if Nick Foles is going to be the quarterback, I think the offense is going to be more efficient and stay on track. So I don't see a path where I think he has a safe floor. I don't see a path how he falls all the way down to a wide receiver 2, where, like you said, Matt, I'm buying in. So, and it's fine to disagree. This is why we have these. So, Tags, I'll let you settle this. Where are you at with Allen Robinson? Do you have him more closer to wide receiver 6 where I have him, or do you have him down where Matt has him?
So Matt's concerns are legitimate in terms of like saying like the efficiency of the offense, the overall quarterback play, but I would argue that it was as bad as it can get last year. Trubisky, obviously wasn't great. I think he averaged 6.6 yards per attempt or something like that. It was really low. So to know that Allen Robinson now has twice the shot at competent quarterback play, I think that does help him. He obviously is the focal point of this offense. 154 targets last year. Sure, we're expecting Anthony Miller to take a step forward this year, but Ted Ginn is the starting number 3 receiver. He's not going to get even the Taylor Gabriel targets. Jimmy Graham is the tight end. Get out of here. Like, this team is kind of like, the way that they built this team is almost like they think they're a veteran team that's built to win a Super Bowl right now. They're not. But Allen Robinson, I feel like he's a guy that he's a volume-driven receiver right now with bad quarterback play. He doesn't necessarily need to be extremely efficient in order to live up to that low-end wide receiver 1 price tag. So I'm actually in the middle. I am at wide receiver 9. I'd say I'm closer to Yates on this debate, because I will own some Allen Robinson if he falls to me at like the top of the 3rd round. I think he's fine to draft there. There are some other receivers that I have over him that are going after an ADP, like maybe Juju Smith-Schuster or Odell Beckham. But I feel like Allen Robinson belongs in that tier just because he's a safe wide receiver. It's almost like, it's like you were saying, it's like I was talking about with Mike Evans. Like, I felt like he's going to bust at his current cost. Allen Robinson's being taken 1 wide receiver selection after him. But Allen Robinson, he doesn't have as many variables as Mike Evans does. And that's why I'm a little bit more okay with it. And I actually, if anything, Nick Foles pushes Trubisky to be better, vice versa, where, again, if Trubisky struggles, they're going to go to Foles. If Foles struggles, they're going to go to Trubisky. And it's just like almost a better shot at efficient quarterback play. And it's really difficult to see this offense as bad as it was in 2019.
For sure. All right, I'm going to give my second guy here because Mike Evans was on my list. So I'm going to give my second guy. That's DeAndre Hopkins. And we're looking at DeAndre Hopkins currently going off the board as a wide receiver 4. And so he's going ahead of guys like Chris Godwin. And so looking at DeAndre Hopkins, and he has been a phenomenal fantasy wide receiver over the past several years. And even doing it previously with without Deshaun Watson, right, with other quarterback play like Brock Osweiler and Brandon Weeden, I think. So these other guys, he's been phenomenal, and he's a phenomenal wide receiver. However, we're looking at him now switching over to Arizona. The volume that DeAndre Hopkins has seen is not going to be there. This Arizona offense spreads the ball around a ton. You still have Larry Fitzgerald involved. You still have Christian Kirk. Hakeem Butler's coming back now, and I liked Hakeem Butler coming out. Now, I'm not projecting him to have a significant role in the offense, but he is still there, and he's going to be a factor. So then, and now Andy Isabella is the other guy that he should be more of a factor this year too. This offense is going to be heavy 11 personnel, get their wide receivers on the field, and spread the ball around. Now, I think Hopkins is fine. I'm at wide receiver 8, so I'm not projecting like, the volume to drop so far that he's going to be outside the top 12 or anything like that. I really like him this year. But for me to have to pay up a wide receiver 4 price tag and take him over a guy who I know is going to get guaranteed volume like Chris Godwin, I will take Chris Godwin 10 times out of 10. Tags, where are you at?
Yeah, Hopkins is someone that, I'm not opposed to Hopkins. I have him as my wide receiver 5, but I'm not touching him I'm looking at ADP overall, not wide receiver. He's being taken in front of Julio Jones, which is a joke. Seriously, it's like someone's playing a joke on me. Julio Jones shouldn't be going after him. He shouldn't be going after Tyreek Hill. Julio should be the 3rd receiver off the board. Hopkins, the reason that I tend to say that I don't think Hopkins is going to bust, I won't draft him at 11 overall. I'll be clear about that. I think he's a middle 2nd round pick. I think he should be going around 18 overall. Is that Hopkins over the course of his career has produced with a lot of bad quarterbacks. And I'm not saying, I'm not willing to say that Kyler Murray is a great quarterback. I'm not. I think that he was mediocre last year. And so many people are jumping on him as like, oh, breakout candidate. He needs to play better in 2020 if he's going to be a breakout candidate. But there are a lot of competition for targets. Larry Fitzgerald didn't come back to sit on the bench. It's kind of like an Adrian Peterson deal where these guys are true, legit Hall of Famers that are not going to come back just to sit on the bench. So Fitzgerald, he's going to see 80-plus targets. Christian Kirk is a guy that was on pace for, I think, 120 last year without the injury. So even if he gets knocked down to 100, it's like we're looking at all these targets and they're adding up. And they do run a lot of 4 wide receiver sets. So knowing there was no offseason, there is some risk involved with players that are switching teams. I like Hopkins awful lot as a player, but I won't touch him at 11 overall. I think he's finishing as a wide receiver 1. The question is, how high does it get?
For sure. All right, Matt, let's spin it to you. Who is your next guy up on this wide receiver list?
I'm torn between talking about Keenan Allen and Stephon Diggs. And
so, I had both of them. I kid you not. I have both of them on my list. Keenan Allen is the one I was going to choose. So if you want to go Diggs, I'll take Allen.
Yeah, I'll go with Diggs here. And part of this, I should say, is maybe just like long-standing bias that I've had against Stephon Diggs. And I don't know why. I've really been biased against him this whole time. But, when he was entering the league, he was a 5th rounder. He wasn't someone I was really all that interested in. So I feel like that's something that's always kind of lingered in my evaluations of him. So I'll just say, like, up front, I know I have a blind spot when it comes to Stephon Diggs. But this year, I feel like that blind spot actually makes a little bit of sense. What we've seen out of Diggs in his past 2 seasons is him playing at his best with the best quarterback of his career in Kirk Cousins. And now, he's going to a team that is going to continue to focus on the run, just like the Vikings did. I don't think he's going to see a massive surge in targets coming his way. He should see the bump from like 95 or something like that he had last year, which was just a ridiculously low number. But he should see a bump up from that, but it's not going to be massive because they're just not going to be throwing the ball all that much in Buffalo. And then he's going to a quarterback in Josh Allen, who I'm imagining should improve in his deep ball accuracy. But last year, he was still one of the worst deep ball passers in the league. And, Stephon Diggs, who last year had an outrageous 12 yards per target, that's just going to regress. And so although he's I think on his own in a vacuum, a very talented player, I just don't think the circumstances are conspiring to get him the volume or the efficiency he's going to need to be someone who's producing as if he's a top 24 wide receiver. I honestly think he's going to be more like a low end wide receiver 3 by the time the season ends.
It all comes down to volume. And so, Tags, are you in agreement here? Obviously, you had him on your list, so it sounds like it. But where are you at? Is it based on Josh Allen? Is it based on volume? What's your reasoning here with Stephon Diggs?
It's a mix of both, honestly. So Stephon Diggs is someone that when I did my projections, he came in at like wide receiver 36. So that was crazy low. And I'm like, Stephon Diggs is way too talented for me to move him down that far. So I actually moved him up, and I think I'm at wide receiver 28 or something like that right now. And I don't feel great about it. I mean, John Brown last year was really good. Can we all agree that John Brown was good? I mean, and John Brown saw 115 targets with this same Josh Allen. And it's not like we're going to say, hey, John Brown, step aside. This is Stephon Diggs' team. You're going to get 50 targets. They're not going to do that. Cole Beasley is still going to play that slot route. It's basically that safety valve for Josh Allen. Allen needs to improve in deep ball accuracy in order for Stephon Diggs to kind of like truly live up to his ADP right now, because Diggs, it's almost like a Duke Johnson thing, right? Where we wonder, Amari Cooper too, where we wonder why these players, no matter what, it's been multiple coaches now where these players have gone through different systems and they're not getting the volume that people think they deserve. Like Stephon Diggs is a top 10 talent wide receiver, in my opinion, but he's never gotten that elite volume. Why? Why has that happened? It's been multiple coaches, it's been multiple coordinators, whatever. So going to Buffalo with no offseason, working with Josh Allen, who struggled with deep ball efficiency, I think Stephon Diggs is going to have a few problems, especially if he doesn't get up into that. I think to live up to this price, he needs to get up to 125 targets with Josh Allen, and I just don't know if that happens. So I'm with you on Stephon Diggs in terms of his average draft position being a bust where he's being drafted, because, again, projections have him as a low-end wide receiver 3 for me too.
I mean, yeah, you're talking about John Brown, 115 targets last year. Cole Beasley had 106 targets last year, guys. So, again, he's not going away either. So to try to factor in all three of these guys getting work in a low passing volume offense, it's not that I don't like these players, and I would love for them to be great for fantasy football. It's just they all kind of cancel each other out. If we do see something happen with, God forbid, with John Brown or Cole Beasley and they miss time, then Stephon Diggs gets a significant bump. But right now, we have to base it off the fact that all three are going to be involved in this offense. Tags, let's go to you. You had Keenan Allen, right?
I do, yeah. So basically, I'm going to give you guys a glimpse into I'm writing the primer draft day edition. I'm trying to get it out for you guys at the end of this week. I just wrote up Keenan Allen actually yesterday. So here's what I have on him. That Keenan Allen has not scored more than 6 touchdowns in any of the last 6 seasons. That's despite Phillip Rivers throwing at least 28 touchdowns in 5 of them. He is a phenomenal route runner, but he's not a go-up-and-get-it receiver that you'll fall in love with in the red zone. Tyrod Taylor, career high, 437 pass attempts. The Chargers threw the ball 597 times last year. So even if we're let's say that we're going to be totally sky high and say Tyrod's going to throw the ball more, or if they move to Justin Herbert, let's say they throw the ball 500 times. That is still a massive decrease. 97 pass attempts that'll be filtered throughout the depth chart, especially and when you don't score touchdowns like Keenan Allen, that's a problem. It's a real problem. So, the good news is that it's a very top-heavy depth chart between him and Mike Williams at wide receiver. But again, if you break that down to 500 times, and that's being extremely high, in my opinion, I think it's realistic to say that he's probably going to be in the 110 to 120 target range. And with Tyrod Taylor and Justin Herbert, a rookie quarterback behind that offensive line that does not have a left tackle, I think this is more of a wide receiver 3 in fantasy football. He's being drafted as the wide receiver 18 or wide receiver 19 right now. And I understand, again, another great football player, but you have to factor in situation. And unfortunately, he's not playing with Rivers anymore. He's playing in a different team that has a great defense that wants to run the football and is going to have, potentially 100 plus fewer pass attempts.
He's at wide receiver 27 for me. So I'm in complete agreement. Matt, it sounds like you agree. What are your quick thoughts here?
Yeah, I have him at wide receiver 31, and pretty much everything Tag said I agree with. I think there's a chance that Mike Williams is actually the wide receiver 1 this year. Not necessarily in targets. I could see Keenan still having more targets, but I imagine that Williams will have more air yards, and I think he will be more efficient at turning his targets into overall yardage.
Absolutely. All right, guys. Well, let's move on here to the quarterback or tight end. We get to choose here which one we want to talk about. So, Tags, I'm going to send it to you. We're looking at either a quarterback or a tight end in the top 12 that you think is going to disappoint.
Austin Hooper, terrible. Why is his ADP still tight end 10? I don't know. Guys, all you have to do is look at the Vikings last year and say that offense was ideal in terms of efficiency. And then you look at it and you say, okay, Kevin Stefanski's come over. He's added 2 tackles to that offensive line. He's added another tight end in the draft in the 4th round. They extended, they picked up the 5th-year option on David Njoku's contract. They signed Austin Hooper. They're trying to recreate what the Vikings had in terms of Odell Beckham is going to be like the Stephon Diggs or Adam Thielen, and then you have Thielen, Jarvis Landry. It's he's trying to recreate this. He's got the 2-back system with Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt. All of a sudden, there's just so many names around here, and it's if there's not a whole lot of passing volume, where does this go? In looking at last year, even if you were to combine combined, Kyle Rudolph and Irv Smith Jr., these guys combined for 95 targets. Like, that's ridiculous. David Njoku's not going to walk out there and see 5 or 10 targets. They actually extended a trade. He wanted a trade. They sat down with him, and he realized that he's going to have a role on the team. So he's like, I take it back. We're going to be fine moving forward. It's basically saying, I don't think it's even close to a lock that Austin Hooper even sees 60 targets this season. And if you're drafting a tight end in the top 10, you better be sure that he's going to see 80 plus targets, because that's essentially what you're looking for out of your tight end one if you want to start him on an every week basis. I think Austin Hooper is going to be a streamer this year. I think you're going to find him on waiver wire sooner rather than later. You're wasting a pick at tight end 10.
Kyle Rudolph last year in 16 games, you mentioned it, Tags, 48 total targets. Now,
and that was with Adam Thielen out 8 games.
Right. He had 6 receiving touchdowns, which caused him to finish as the tight end 14, so he was a back-end tight end 1. But that's not what you want when you're drafting a tight end, specifically at tight end 10. You want, like, if you get a guy at, you're drafting him with your final pick, right? Like, one of these players that you can get, and you just go into the season with the mindset that I'm streaming the position, and they finish as the tight end 14, then great. Like, that was good. But to get someone at tight end 10 and then have them finish below a tight end 1, that's not great. That's not what you want. Matt, what are your thoughts here on Austin Hooper? Do you kind of see this offense playing out similarly? What do you see his role being like?
Hooper was going to be the guy I was going to mention. So 100% agree. Basically, you could just play back what Tag said, and people would just assume it's me because of the voice. And Tag's mentioned, maybe 60 targets. Like, we're a little uncertain about even that. I have Hooper projected for around 63 targets. I think it is that type of situation where we're going to see a very Minnesota Vikings-esque type of offense where, it's very run focused, very funneled through the running backs, and they're just, they're not going to be enough targets to go around for Hooper. So, people, I think in sharper leagues, maybe, they're starting to get hip to it and push him down the board. But in a lot of leagues, he's still going as, tight end 8 to tight end 10, and that's just way too high. I have him closer to, let me see here, like closer to like tight end. That's bad. Like tight end 19.
I think that's exactly where I have him.
Wow. And it's it's a projection. I would say like he probably has a higher floor. Like he's going to have decent usage, and I think that offense as a whole is going to be better than it was last year. So there's some possibility for him. Like he's not going to be a total bust, but he's not going to provide the upside that you would want out of someone going in the top 12. So he's certainly someone I would stay away from. I could pivot to another guy if we want to talk about that.
Yeah, let's go ahead. Bring up your guy.
Okay, so if I'm not looking at Austin Hooper as someone who is a bust candidate, the guy I'm looking at would be Jared Cook. And this is, probably a chalky answer, but, he finished really well last year, but he's going to have to compete for, targets with obviously Michael Thomas in New Orleans, and then they added Emmanuel Sanders. Obviously, you have Alvin Kamara there. So Jared Cook is the number 4 option in this offense. And Drew Brees was really efficient last year at turning his pass attempts into touchdowns. I don't think he's going to be quite as efficient this year. So I see Jared Cook getting fewer targets, probably being a little less efficient at turning his targets into yards, and then really taking a step back in the touchdown department. So, if you're looking at Jared Cook in ADP as someone that you think might offer value as like the tight end 9, tight end 10, I think you're going to be disappointed. I think he's going to come in more as a mid-range tight end 2.
I'm in complete agreement. He was someone on my list. You look at last season, 65 targets, only 65 targets. We just finished talking about Kyle Rudolph finishing with, 50. Jared Cook, 65 targets, 705 receiving yards, 16.4 yards per reception. That's ridiculous for a tight end who's now 33 years old to average 16.4 yards per reception. I don't see that happening. But then here's the kicker. 9 receiving touchdowns on 65 targets, 43 total receptions. Like, those numbers are all going to come crashing back down when you factor in, like you said, Matt, Emmanuel Sanders now a part of this offense. He's going to be involved. Alvin Kamara was not healthy last year, so he should see an uptick in targets again this season, bounce back to the to his average. And then they also spent significant draft capital to go get Adam Troutman out of Dayton. Now, Troutman's not going to be heavily involved in this offense, but he's going to take some work that, was going to Josh Hill last year, right? So Adam Troutman is more talented than Josh Hill. So he's going to be just another factor where I look at Jared Cook's average draft position and I'm like, no way in hell am I going anywhere close to him. Tags, this was funny. We were talking about Jared Cook early on in the offseason. I shocked you that I had him down like tight end 18 or something like that. And you were like, no, I have him up at 7. And then you did projections. You were like, he came out to be like tight end 25 or something like that, right? Like, so where are you at with Jared Cook now?
Yeah, I've settled in at tight end 16 is where I have them. And basically, after going through last year's volume, because tight ends, volume, that's really all you need to project. If you can correctly project volume, you will nail tight ends. And Jared Cook last year was 16th among tight ends in actual opportunity, in terms of like if you were to break it down and say this is where he was targeted, how much he should have scored, how much he did score. He finished number 7. He was number 16 in opportunity. So you do have to say he's playing with Drew Brees, so he's going to have increased efficiency more than the usual tight end. But then you also have to dial back some of the targets, most likely because he has Emmanuel Sanders now added to the offense. So it's like trying to figure this out and say that the Saints overall are probably going to throw the ball less because that defense is in as good a shape as it's ever been. That team is primed for a Super Bowl run. So Jared Cook getting up there in age, all these things factored in. And on top of that, Drew Brees too. I mean, Drew Brees, his efficiency has to drop at some point, guys. How old is Brees now? 41?
Yeah, 41 or 42.
Crazy, man. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Quarterbacks used to get to 38 and we'd be like, they're done.
Right, exactly. All right, I'm going to fly through my guy. That's Evan Engram. I've talked about him this offseason, but for a guy who is going as a tight end 8 in ADP, and actually here's the shocking part, he's tight end 6 in ECR, so the experts are higher on Evan Engram, and I do not get it. You're talking about a guy who is incredibly talented his rookie season, but that was on the back of pure volume. Now you're factoring in that he has significant injury risk, and that you have a very, very loaded receiving core in this offense. That I do not see a path for Evan Engram to reach the target totals that he did in his rookie season, which then inflated his numbers to get him up to a top 5 finish. I do not see him finishing anywhere close to where he's currently going. I'm staying far, far away from Evan Engram. Matt, let's get your really quick thoughts here, and then we'll move on to a fun little game.
I'm with you on Evan Engram. Probably not to the extent that you are, but he's not someone I've gotten a lot of. And, part of it is not really so much the injury. It just has to do with that new offense in New York under Jason Garrett. I expect it to be, something similar to what we saw in Dallas before Kellen Moore. So an offense that plays a little bit slower, leans a little bit more towards the running back, and even funnels a decent number of the targets through the running back. So, I think it's going to be a great year for Saquon Barkley, but I think that just means fewer opportunities for everyone else in the receiving game, including Evan Engram, who also has to compete with Sterling Shepard, Golden Tate, and Darius Slayton for targets.
Right. Yep. Okay, well, hey guys, let's move on. We're going to do a fun little game here where we bring in help from our listeners. We posted on Twitter yesterday for some suggestions on how to end the phrase, who is the most likely to. We got some great responses here, and I'm just going to go back and forth with you guys and get your guys' rapid-fire responses. Sound good?
Sounds good.
All right, Tags. Who is the most likely to be on the most championship teams in 2020?
Oh, wow. I think it's boring to say Christian McCaffrey. I'm trying to think of who I should say instead of Christian McCaffrey. Who's Calvin Ridley?
Okay, I like that one. Matt, who is the most likely to be the best streaming quarterback in Week 1?
Week 1? I have no idea.
Full disclosure. I know that's a very difficult question if you do not have the schedules pulled up. Tags, do you have any idea?
Who's going to be the quarterback 1?
Who is the most likely to be the best streaming quarterback in Week 1?
I'm looking at it real quick. Let's see. It depends on who you say streamers, because Ben Roethlisberger at the Giants sounds like awfully enticing, but it's a road game, so I really don't like him that much. Tyrod Taylor at Cincinnati, I think that's a good one.
Yep. Yeah, that would be one that I would say. Matt, I'll go back to you. Who is the most likely to be a second half of the year stud?
Second half of the year stud. I think Antonio Gibson, and this might be a kind of chalky answer now, and I don't know if it really even matters because people are probably overpricing him at this point, but I imagine that in Washington we will see Adrian Peterson open the year as the rushing leader in the backfield, but Antonio Gibson, I think even at that point early on, will probably be the guy they rely on more in the receiving game, but he will get opportunities in the running game, and I think he will be explosive just based on, you know, what we've seen out of him in college, the athleticism that he has, and eventually, just like we saw, you know, out of David Johnson in his rookie season, I think in the second half of the year, the team is going to pivot away from Adrian Peterson and towards the guy who is the well-rounded back who has unreal athleticism.
I really like that answer. Tags, is there someone that comes to mind for a second half of the year stud?
I mean, Jonathan Taylor's going to be an all-year stud, but he's going to like really shine in the second half. So Jonathan Taylor, I guess.
I like it.
J.K.
All
Dobbins,
right,
maybe. Maybe J.K. Dobbins was a better answer because
sure.
I think Taylor's going to crush from the beginning.
Yeah. Okay. Who is the most? We got two more. So who is the most likely to lead all running backs in receptions, excluding Christian McCaffrey? Tags will go to you.
I think it's possible. It's Kamara.
Kamara. Matt, would you have a different answer than Kamara? Would Saquon come into that consideration for you?
I would go with Kamara. The guy I would place maybe number 2 would actually be Austin Eckler.
Okay.
Yeah, I think Eckler has a pretty decent chance there.
Yeah, we were talking about him in a PPR mock draft that we did yesterday, and I drafted him as my RB2 because his value in PPR, full PPR leagues, is incredible this year. I'm really excited for him. Okay, final question here. I'll have both of you answer it. Tags first, then Matt. Who is the most likely to drastically outperform their ADP?
Ooh, these things are moving all the time, and it's getting tougher and tougher to find that stuff. Hayden Hurst.
That was someone that I was considering. Matt, who do you have?
Most likely to outperform his ADP. Okay, so I could see. Let me set up the framing for this. I could see a situation where a guy who goes really late outperforms his ADP, but it's not like enough to really make all that big of a difference, just in terms of like his fantasy impact overall. So I'll say Cam Akers, because you can get him as a low end RB3 in a lot of leagues, but I think he has top 6 upside.
Can I give another answer? Like I thought about it. You could take Hayden Hurst. I'll take AJ Green.
Okay. Yeah. Yep, that would make sense. All right, guys, that is all. That's all we've got for today.
That would make sense.
That would make sense. That's all we've got for today, guys. Huge thank you to Matthew Freedman for jumping on and chatting with us. Thanks so much, man.
Yeah, my pleasure. You guys have a good one.
Yeah, absolutely. Don't forget to follow him on Twitter if you don't already at MattFTheOracle. And guys, don't forget about the amazing giveaway that we have going on. Once we reach 7,000 reviews on Apple Podcasts, we will be giving away an incredible amount of prizes for one lucky listener. To enter the giveaway, just leave an honest review for our show on Apple Podcasts. Take a screenshot of that review and also take a screenshot showing that you subscribed to our YouTube channel to qualify for the bonus prize, and send those to contest@fantasypros.com. That's going to do it for today's show, guys. For Mike Tagliere and Matt Freedman, I'm Kyle Yates, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for tuning in to the Fantasy Pros YouTube channel. Make sure to check out our featured videos as well. Also, make sure to click that red subscribe button to get notified when we post videos in the future.